The day Obiora Ease arrived in Agita village with a clay pot balanced on his head and worn rubber sandals on his feet, nobody gave him a second look. That was exactly what he had planned. He came on a Tuesday morning when the market was still setting up, and the women were arranging their goods, and the men were walking to their farms with hoes over their shoulders. He walked through the main road slowly, the clay pot steady on his head, a small raffia bag hanging from his shoulder, dressed in the clothes of a man had been wearing the same shirt for 3 days. He found the landlord whose compound he had arranged to rent a room in through a middleman. He paid 3 months in advance with worn Naira notes counted carefully from a worn envelope. The landlord looked at the notes, looked at the man, and assumed what everyone assumes when they see worn clothes and careful counting. He showed him the small room at the back of the compound. It had a window, a ceiling fan that worked, and a door that locked. Obiora set down his bag, looked around the room, and nodded once. "This will do," he said. The landlord left. Obiora sat on the edge of the bed, looked at the peeling paint on the wall, and smiled. Not the smile of a poor man grateful for modest shelter. A different smile. The smile of a man who had found exactly the theater he was looking for. The story of how he got there began, as most important stories do, with a loss. Obiora Ease was 38 years old and had been the managing director of Ease Integrated Resources, a construction and supply chain company operating across 4 states. Since he was 31, he had built the company from a single truck and a government contract his father had helped him secure. And in 7 years, he had turned it into the kind of enterprise that made other businessmen across the table straighten their posture before they spoke. He had money. He had buildings in Enugu and a flat in Lagos. He had a driver named Emmanuel who knew when to speak, and when not to. What he did not have was a wife. Not for lack of trying. He had tried 3 times in the years since he started making real money. Each time, the woman arrived in a version of herself that felt designed rather than real. Careful laughter. Opinions that shifted to match his. One had researched his company before their second date, and referenced the turnover figures in a way that was meant to seem casual, but was not. The third one, Ada, had been the most painful because he had almost believed she was different. Then he overheard a phone call. Not intentionally. He had come back into the restaurant for his forgotten phone, and heard her telling someone, "He has more than you think. The company alone is worth at least $2 billion. I checked. Just be patient." He had walked out with his phone and driven home in silence. That night he had sat in his large sitting room in Enugu and understood something clearly. He could not see himself. He had become a balance sheet that happened to have a face and a name attached to it. Anyone looking at him was looking at the numbers behind him, not at him. He thought about his father. A man of modest means and enormous warmth. People had loved his father not because of what he had, but because of how he saw them. His father had died at 62 with very little money saved, and a funeral so crowded with genuine mourners that they had run out of chairs inside and outside the compound. Obiora had stood at that graveside thinking, "This man was rich in a way I have not yet learned to be." He wanted to find out if he could be. He heard about Agita from a business associate who had grown up there. A real community, the man had said, where people know each other by their trade and their character. Not by their cars. Not by their address. By whether they are decent. Obiora sat with that word for 3 days. Decent. He spent 2 weeks learning the basics of palm wine tapping from an old man named Matsi Okafor in a village near Enugu, who had been tapping palms for 50 years and found the whole arrangement quietly amusing. "You are learning to look like something," Matsi Okafor said one afternoon. "But looking like a thing and being a thing are different." "I know," Obiora said. Matsi Okafor shook his head slowly and went back to his palm wine. Obiora bought the clay pot, the worn clothes, the rubber sandals. He roughed up the new clothes with sandpaper until they looked 3 months old, the detail he would later be most ashamed of. He told his board he was traveling abroad for rest. He turned off his phone. And so on a Tuesday morning, he walked into Agita with a clay pot on his head and a plan he was not entirely sure would work. Now, before we meet the woman who would change everything, here is who she was. Because this story only makes sense if you understand what kind of person she was before he ever saw her. Her name was Chizamike, 29 years old. primary school teacher at St. Agnes Primary School at the edge of the village. Eldest daughter. Her father had died 5 years earlier. A trader who had made enough to keep the family comfortable but had managed money the way generous optimists manage it, believing the next transaction would always cover the current gap. When he died, Chisholm was 24. She had looked at what was left, looked at her mother and younger sister, and simply stepped into the space that opened. Without complaint. Without waiting for someone else to step first. Every morning before school, she woke at 5 to prepare breakfast before her mother and sister were fully awake. She walked 40 minutes to school because the Okada fare was money better spent on her sister's examination fees. At school, she taught 27 children between 9 and 11, several of whom had never owned their own pencil before she quietly arranged for the school to provide them. She marked papers in the evening after dinner. She kept a small notebook tracking each child's progress in her own shorthand, not because the school required it, but because she needed to know. On weekends, she took in sewing work from neighbors. The money went into an envelope on the top shelf of the wardrobe labeled with a single letter, her sister's name initial, and was never touched for anything else. The village had opinions about her. That Chisholm, one woman said to another near the market one morning, she is too careful. A good man could come, and she would analyze him for 2 years before she decided anything. What is she waiting for? The second woman shrugged. Some people know what they want. What does she want? The first asked. Something real, the second woman said simply. That is what her mother says. This was the woman Obiora Ease had not yet met. This was who was walking toward his stall on a Tuesday morning when he had been in Aguta for less than a week. He set up at the edge of the market with a supply arrangement from a real palm wine tapper named Chikwudi, who lived 2 kilometers outside the village. Chikwudi was a quiet man of practical disposition. He had looked at Obiora for a long moment when the arrangement was proposed, said nothing about what he clearly suspected, and agreed to the commission without questions. The commission was 4 times the going rate, which Chikwudi was wise enough not to question. The stall was a small table, 2 low benches, and a handwritten sign on cardboard. Fresh palm wine, Chikwudi & Co. He sat behind on his first morning and waited. The market came to him slowly. An old man bought a cup and sat on the bench to drink it in silence, which was the best review Obiora had received in years. By midday, he had sold enough to pay for the morning. It was the first money he had earned through direct physical transactions since his 20s, and the feeling was unexpectedly satisfying. He sat behind his table and watched the market, and tried to remember the last time he had simply watched anything without also managing it. He could not remember. He was refilling cups when she arrived. She came from the direction of the main road carrying 2 heavy bags, one on her head and one in her hand, moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been carrying heavy things since childhood. Not rushing, not complaining, just moving steadily through the market the way water moves through a familiar channel. She had the kind of face that was not immediately striking but became more so the longer you looked, the kind of face that rewarded attention. She stopped at the stall across from his to buy something, set the bag down briefly from her head, and while she was waiting she looked up and noticed him. Not with particular interest. Just the noticing that happens when eyes move across a busy scene. She looked away. Then she looked back. He was already watching her. She raised an eyebrow slightly, a small expression that said, I see you watching and I have noted it, and then looked away again, concluding her purchase. He had not intended to speak. He had told himself he would be patient. But something about the eyebrow made him. The palm wine is fresh, he said. If you want to rest for a moment. She looked at him. Her eyes were direct, and carried no performance in them. No calculation. Just attention. I do not drink palm wine in the morning, she said. Nobody does, he replied. But it is not morning anymore. It is almost noon. She looked at the sun briefly as if verifying this. Then she set the bag down from her head and sat on the far edge of the bench. He poured a small cup without asking. She tasted it, said nothing for a moment, then said, It is good. I know, he said. She looked at him with an expression that was half surprised and half amused at the confidence. He realized immediately he had said it with the quiet authority of someone far more comfortable in his own skin than a first-week palm wine tapper should be. He adjusted. Chikwiti's supply is reliable, he added. She nodded once. Then she picked up her bags, paid for the cup with careful change from a small purse, counting it precisely without apology, and walked on. He watched her go. He did not even know her name yet. He found it from Mama Ngozi, who ran the pepper stall 3 tables away and had appointed herself the unofficial information desk of the entire Agita market. He asked simply, "Who is the woman who bought pepper earlier, medium height, 2 bags, blue blouse?" Mama Ngozi gave him the look of a market woman assessing a man's intentions with years of experience behind the assessment. Then she said, "That is Chizumike. Schoolteacher. Primary 4. Good girl. Serious girl." She paused. "Why?" "Just asking," he said. Mama Ngozi's expression made clear she had never believed that phrase in her life. He saw Chisum again on Thursday afternoon after school. She moved through the market with the same purposeful efficiency, a memorized list in her head rather than on paper, each stall visited in order, no wandering. She passed his stall. She looked at him. He looked at her. She stopped. "Your sign says Chikwiti & Co., she said. "Who is the Co.?" "I am the Co., he said. She almost smiled. "Does Chikwiti know he has a Co.?" "He knows," Obiora said. "He just does not know the full details." She looked at him for a moment. The sentence had been slightly too precise for a palm wine tapper 1 week into a village. He saw her register it. "How long have you been in Agita?" she asked. "About a week," he said. "Where from?" "Enugu side," he said. Which was true enough. She nodded. Then she said something that made him very still. "You do not look comfortable," she said. "In what way?" He asked carefully. "Like someone sitting in a chair that is not his usual size," she said. Simply. Without accusation. The way someone states what they observe when they're used to looking honestly. "The chair is fine," he said. She nodded once, accepting the incomplete answer. Then she moved on. He sat very still after she left. He had been in Agita a week. He had spoken to the landlord, to Chikwiti, to Mama Ngozi, to dozens of customers. Not one of them had looked at him that carefully. She had walked past twice and noticed something everyone else had missed. He would need to be more careful. Or, a quieter part of him said, he would need to talk to her more. The following Tuesday morning a commotion broke out 3 stalls away. A boy of about 10 had knocked over a woman's entire display of tomatoes. The woman, Mama Bose, a large and strong-voiced trader, began shouting immediately. The tomatoes rolled everywhere. The boy tried to gather them while Mama Bose's voice climbed higher with every second. Then he saw Chisum arrive at the edge of the scene. She walked directly to Mama Bose. She did not raise her voice. She put one hand briefly on Mama Bose's arm and spoke close to her ear. He could not hear what she said, but Mama Bose's volume dropped. Chisum was already crouching to gather tomatoes. 2 other people followed. The boy stopped crying and started helping properly. In 4 minutes the tomatoes were back in a display. The crowd dispersed. Chisum stood, adjusted her bag, and continued with her shopping as if nothing had happened. Obiora had been watching the whole scene. He realized he was smiling. He poured himself a cup of palm wine, which he did not usually drink, and sat with it. He did not approach her that day. He let the observation settle. He had learned in 15 years of business that a decision made from excitement was rarely as good as one made from certainty. He would be certain before he moved. He became certain by Wednesday. On Wednesday evening as the market was closing, he walked to where she was finishing a purchase and stood nearby until she turned and noticed him. She looked at him with an expression that said she had expected this. "I wanted to say something," he began. "About what you did on Tuesday. With the boy and Mama Bose." She said, "The boy knocked the tomatoes by accident. There was no reason to make him cry more loudly than necessary." "You could have kept walking," he said. She shook her head. It would have been harder to ignore it. He nodded. He understood this. Some things are heavier when you walk past them than when you stop for them. He said, "My name is Obiora." "I know," she said. "The village knows the new palm wine tapper from Enugu side." He almost laughed. "Of course it did." "Chisum," she said. "I know," he said. The eyebrow went up. "Mama Ngozi?" she asked. He confirmed nothing. She seemed to find this sufficient. They stood at the edge of the emptying market and talked for the first time without the distance of a transaction between them. She told him about the school, what it meant to teach children who arrived hungry, which grade was the most difficult, how she tracked each child privately because the school's records were not reliable enough. She spoke about her students with a steady care that was more honest than enthusiasm. She was not performing her job's nobility. She was simply reporting what was real about it. When she left, she said goodbye the way people say goodbye when they expect to speak again. He walked back to his small room. The peeling paint was the same. The ceiling fan turned with its usual rhythm. But something had shifted in the room in the way rooms shift when something has been decided in them, even silently. One morning that same week, he saw an old woman at the groundnut paste stall struggling to open a jar whose lid had rusted shut. Her hands shook too much to grip it properly. She tried twice and set it down. The stall owner was busy with another customer. The old woman waited with the patient resignation of someone who had learned not to ask. Obiora was passing. He stopped, took the jar without being asked, opened it, set it on the table in front of her, and kept walking. He did not slow his pace. He did not wait to be thanked. He had not known Chisholm was watching from 2 stalls away. The following Thursday afternoon, 3 stalls away from his own, he witnessed something at the food stall that he carried with him for a long time afterward. He was 3 stalls away when he saw Chisholm buy food and receive more change than she should have. She stood still for a moment, counted the change again. Then she went back to the stall and returned the extra money. The stall owner was surprised. Chisholm said, "You would have found the shortage at the end of the day. I am saving you the confusion." He was holding a cup of palm wine and set it down very carefully because his hands had gone slightly unsteady. Not from weakness. From recognition. This was the thing he had been looking for. Not a performance of virtue. Not goodness displayed for an audience. She had returned the money because it was the right thing to do. There was no one watching her when she did it. No one except him, 3 stalls away, who was supposed to be selling palm wine. He sat behind his stall for the rest of that afternoon and made a decision. She was real. Before we continue, tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. And if this story is speaking to something in you, please subscribe to Visa's Tales. You will not want to miss what comes next. On a Friday evening 3 weeks after they had exchanged names, he found her sitting alone on a bench at the edge of the market after closing. She was eating groundnut from a small paper cone, watching the road. She looked tired in a way she did not show during market hours. He sat down beside her. Not close. She looked at him. "I have a question," he said. She waited. "What are you doing on Sunday afternoon?" he asked. She looked at him steadily. "Why?" "Because I would like to talk to you without a market around us," he said. She ate a groundnut. Looked at the road. "I go to my mother's compound on Sunday afternoons," she said. "After church." "Before that," he said. "Or after?" She was quiet. Then she said before. 2 o'clock. The compound near the primary school. The one with the orange tree at the gate. He nodded. He did not say thank you because it would have sounded wrong for something that was not a favor. She stood, picked up her bags, and left. He sat on the bench until the market road was quiet. A dog crossed somewhere in the distance. A generator hummed to life nearby. The evening smelled of groundnut oil and earth after a light rain. He was at the compound with the orange tree at 5 minutes to 2. He had worn clean clothes, still in the register of a palm wine tapper, but clean. He had ironed them himself, which he had not done in 15 years, and the collar was slightly imperfect, but he had decided not to care. She arrived at exactly 2 o'clock. She wore a simple yellow blouse and a plain wrapper. Her hair was loose. The first time he'd seen it that way. Not the tight style she wore for school and market, but loose and unencumbered. She looked like a version of herself that had decided not to manage anything for one afternoon. They walked the footpath that ran along the edge of the village, past a small stream, through the edge of a cassava farm, curving back toward the main road. The kind of path built by people who needed to talk without being watched. They talked for 2 hours. Not about impressive things. About real things. He told her about growing up in Enugu. Certain parts entirely true, Others softened to remove the specific texture of wealth. He told her about a period in his mid-20s when 3 months passed without stable income, and he had understood for the first time what it felt like when money was an emergency rather than a convenience. That was entirely true, and speaking it now, without the armor of his current life around it, felt clarifying in a way he had not expected. She told him about her father. When he died, she had been 24. She had looked at what was left, looked at her mother and younger sister, and stepped into the gap. She said it without drama, as information about how things had been. He listened, not to impress her with his listening, because what she was saying was worth hearing. At one point she stopped walking and looked out across the cassava farm beside the path. The afternoon light fell across the rows evenly, green and unhurried. My father used to say that every good thing takes the right season, she said. He was talking about crops, but I think he meant most things. Your father sounds like someone who saw things warmly, Obiora said. She smiled slightly. Warmly more than clearly, which is almost the same but not quite. She looked at the path ahead. He was not always right, but he was always kind about being wrong. I miss that. The warmth more than the wisdom. He said, I think the people who teach us what love looks like leave a particular absence when they go. She looked at him. Yes, she said. That is exactly it. They walked in silence for a while. Not uncomfortable. The kind of silence between people who have said something true and are giving it room. Then she said, What you want from life, Obiora? Not the work. The work is obvious for most men. What else? He thought about it honestly. He said, I want to be known by someone who knows me and still chooses. Not because of what I represent. Because of who I am when none of that is in a room. She was quiet. Then she said, That is what everyone wants. Most people just do not say it plainly. He said, You asked a plain question. She almost smiled. Fair enough, she said. When the path curved back toward the main road, she said something he would carry with him for days. You are a careful person, she said. What do you mean? He asked. You watch things before you decide them. You notice details. She looked at the path ahead. But there is something you are not saying. I can feel the edge of it. I am not asking what it is. But I want you to know that I can feel it. He walked in silence for a moment. She continued. Whatever it is, she said, her voice calm, without pressure. I would rather you tell me when you are ready than manage it like something you are keeping from going badly. He said, I will tell you. Soon. She nodded once. Then she said goodbye and walked toward her mother's compound. He stood on the road and watched her go. He was not testing her anymore. He was afraid of losing her. He went back to his room and sat with that fear. He understood it clearly. He was afraid that when he told her the truth, she would feel the past weeks had been managed rather than real. That she had been observed and assessed without her consent. That the man she had talked to on the footpath had been playing a character the whole time she was being herself. He was afraid she would be right about that. On a Wednesday evening, he helped her carry market bags to the compound near the school. They had fallen into this arrangement over the previous 2 weeks without discussing it. At the gate, under the orange tree whose leaves were moving in the late afternoon light, he stopped. She turned to face him. I need to tell you something, he said. She set down her bag. She waited with the patience of someone who had been expecting this moment and had decided to give it the space it needed. My name is Obiora Ease, he said. I am not only a palm wine tapper. She said nothing. He told her, carefully and completely. The company. The buildings in Enugu. The flat in Lagos. The 3 women before her who had each known what he had before they knew who he was. The decision to come somewhere no one knew him. The clay pot. The raffia bag. The worn clothes he had bought new and then roughed with sandpaper until they looked 3 months old. He told her about Matsi Okafor, who had shaken his head slowly and gone back to his drinking. He told her about Ada and the restaurant and the phone call. When he finished, the orange tree moved in the evening air above them. She looked at him for a long time. Then she said, I know. He stared at her. She looked at him steadily. The eyebrow went up. The same small expression from the very first day at the stall. The one that said, I see you and I have noted it. Except now it meant something entirely different. I have known for about 3 weeks, she said. The silence that followed had a specific weight. She said, the way you said I know about the palm wine on that first day. The way you carried yourself. Men who have grown up without money carry their bodies differently. The body remembers scarcity, and it shows in how a person carries themselves. You do not carry your body that way. She paused. And Chikwuti's wife told her sister. The sister told Mama Ngozi. Mama Ngozi does not always share everything she knows, but she asks questions that point in directions. I followed the direction. He sat down on the low wall beside the gate. She remained standing. She said, I wanted to see if you would tell me yourself, and how you would do it when you did. He said, and? She said, you told me clearly. You did not minimize the sandpaper, and you did not pretend it was nothing. He said, you stayed. After you knew. She said, you're decent to people. Not performing decency, actually decent. With the boy and Mama Bose. With the old woman at the groundnut paste stall. I watch you watching those things and not looking away. He said, you watch me watching. She said, I notice most things. He said, are you angry? She thought about it honestly. No, she said. A little offended by the sandpaper. But not angry. He said, what happens now? She picked up her bag. She said, now you go back to being whatever you are. And I decide whether I want to know that version of you as well as I know this one. He said, and if you do? She looked at him under the orange tree. The evening light came gold through the leaves. Then I will tell you, she said. She walked into the compound. He sat on the low wall outside the gate for a long time. He thought that in 15 years of business, across hundreds of negotiations, he had never been outmaneuvered so completely, and felt so grateful about it. 2 weeks later a message reached him through Mama Ngozi. 4 words. Come for tea. Sunday. He arrived at the compound at the appointed time. Her mother was there, a small woman with Chisholm's same direct eyes and a warmer version of her daughter's composed manner. She asked him questions with the precise courtesy of a woman assessing a man for serious purposes. He answered everything honestly. His background. His work. The reason he had come to Agita the way he had. When he was done, her mother looked at Chisholm, who was sitting nearby with her tea. Then she looked back at him. You came correctly, her mother said. Not the method. The intention was correct. He said, thank you, Mama. Her mother said, my husband would have liked you. He liked people who said what they meant when they were ready, and not before. Chisholm did not look up from her teacup, but he saw her shoulders ease. He left that Sunday and drove back to the small room behind the landlord's house. He sat on the edge of the bed the way he had sat on his first day. The room was the same. He was not. He called Emmanuel the next morning. He said, I am coming back. Arrange the office for Thursday. He looked at the worn rubber sandals beside the door. The clay pot in the corner. The raffia bag on its nail. He looked at all of it for a moment. He left the sandals. He left the clay pot. He left the raffia bag. Then he sent Chisholm a message on the basic handset. I would like to come to Agita properly. With my family. To do this the right way. Her reply came 40 minutes later. Come correctly. He drove back to Enugu the following day. He arranged the office for Thursday. The machinery of Ease Integrated Resources resumed its motion. That evening he turned off the office light and went home. What happened next, as the village said when the story spread the way stories spread in Agita, shocked everyone. It shocked them that the quiet man selling palm wine was Obiora Ease, whose name appeared on construction boards across Imo and Enugu and Anambra states. It shocked the women who had clucked about Chisholm being too careful and too serious. It turned out the carefulness had served her very well. It shocked Mama Ngozi, who felt her role in the information chain deserved formal acknowledgement. It shocked Uncle Emeka, Chisholm's senior male relative, who had come to the compound to deliver a firm word about family standards. He had settled into his chair and begun his speech with full confidence. He had not got far before Obiora, sitting calmly across from him, began explaining the current structure of Ease Integrated Resources. Uncle Emeka stopped speaking somewhere around the 3rd sentence. By the 5th he had set down his cup. He looked at Chisholm in the doorway. Chisholm looked back with an expression that was not unkind. Uncle Emeka said, very quietly, God works in his own way. Chisholm said, yes, uncle. He nodded and accepted another cup of tea. The engagement followed tradition properly and completely. Obiora came with family and elders, and the correct order of things. He wore an agbada he had worn to 2 weddings and 1 burial. Clothes that had lived in real events, not bought for the occasion. He did not come performing wealth. He came performing respect, which is a different thing and a more important one. Chisholm's mother cried when the formalities were concluded. Not because of the money, because her daughter had chosen clearly and well, and because it had been a long time since the compound felt so full. At Chisholm's insistence, Chikwudi was given a seat of honor at the gathering. He had not known what he was hosting, she pointed out. He had simply been decent to a stranger. That deserved acknowledgement. Chikwudi sat in his chair of honor and drank his own palm wine without saying much about any of it, which was entirely in keeping with his nature. Mama Ngozi arrived without being formally invited and was given food and a seat, because attempting to uninvite Mama Ngozi from a story she had helped move along would have been both pointless and unkind. She told the account of the palm wine tapper's first week with the authority of someone who had known the outcome from the beginning, which was not accurate, but which no one present chose to contest. Later that evening, when the gathering had quieted to small conversations and the compound was lit by lanterns, Chisholm sat beside Obiora under the same orange tree where he had told her the truth. The leaves moved in the same slow evening wind. The roots were in the earth her father had walked. She looked at the compound. Her mother talking with relatives she had not seen in months, her sister laughing with a cousin, the older women comparing notes on life the way older women do. She thought about her father. His generous optimism. The way he believed the next thing would always cover the gap. She had spent 5 years covering the gap herself and had become good at it. Perhaps too careful, the village said, but the carefulness had brought her here. To this evening. To a man who had come to Agita specifically to find someone who would not count what he had before they counted who he was. She had been counting the same thing in him. Obiora looked at her and said, I should have told you sooner. She looked at him. You told me when you were ready, she said. And I was already certain before you did. He said. Certain of what? She said. That you were someone worth the patience. The orange tree moved. The lanterns made warm circles of light across the compound. Somewhere a child was laughing at something that did not need to be explained. This story is not about wealth revealing itself. Wealth was never the point. The point is a man who sat behind a clay pot of palm wine and watched a woman return someone's extra change when no one was looking. The point is a woman who looked at a man in worn sandals and said, You do not look comfortable in the way someone speaks when they are paying full attention. The point is 2 people who are both looking for the same thing and found it in the most ordinary place. A market in a village, between a borrowed table and a cardboard sign, in the weeks before either of them said anything true. Obiora did not find love despite his disguise. He found it because the disguise removed everything that usually got in the way and left only who he actually was. A man who watches, who notices, who chooses carefully, who is embarrassed by sandpaper and moved by small acts of honesty. And Chisholm did not fall in love with a billionaire. She fell in love with a man who read business news in worn sandals and said I know about palm wine with slightly too much confidence, and who had the decency to tell her the truth even when he was afraid of what telling it would cost him. The world will always tell you that love requires grand arrivals. A grand gesture. A dramatic moment of revelation that changes everything at once. But sometimes the most important thing arrives on a Tuesday morning with a clay pot on its head and worn rubber sandals on its feet. It finds a table at the edge of the market. It pours you a cup. And it says, very simply, it is almost noon, you know. And something in you recognizes it before you have the words for what you are recognizing. If this story moved something in you, tell us in the comments. Where are you watching from? And have you ever met someone who saw you before you showed them who you were? Subscribe to Visa's Tales. Share this with someone who is still waiting for something real. Because it is out there. Sometimes it is sitting 3 stalls away in the market, watching you return someone's extra change. And it has been watching for longer than you know.